first off, okay, when you started to write this book and your friends knew about it, maybe the first copy came out, the hardback came out, did people immediately stop inviting you to parties to see them interact with their kids?
No, thank goodness. Although I will say, actually, the timing of the book, it came out right in the middle of the pandemic. So it's not like we were doing much anyway. So it's a very interesting question because maybe if it had been normal times, I would have stopped being invited to parties. I will say that I was terrified of going out in public with my children. And what if they started acting like assholes? And then everybody's like, isn't that the lady who wrote the book, How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes? Like I started getting very self-conscious because, everyone thinks of me as like the lady who wrote the book on how to raise non-assholes. And then if my kids were throwing tantrums in the grocery store, what does that say?
And in the book, you talk a little bit about this. You're like, hey, kind of reframe it a little bit. If kids are throwing tantrums in the grocery stores, it's not necessarily a terrible reflection on you as a parent. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And really, my book title it should be How to Raise Kids Who Don't Grow Up to Be Assholes,
Mm.
not How to Raise Kids Who Aren't currently sometimes acting like assholes, because I do think that it is totally normal and expected and actually kind of good for kids to make mistakes and test boundaries and break rules, because that is how they learn, right? I mean, we're not born knowing what's socially acceptable and what we're supposed to do in different situations, and so kids kind of learn as they go. It's trial and error, and yes, they are going to do things that are going to mortify us, and then we can use that as a teaching moment, right? And it's as a way, a reason to engage with them and to teach them what is actually acceptable. So, and also, kids' brains are totally different from adult brains. The part of the brain that is responsible for rational thinking and impulse control and patience, that does not fully develop until age 25. So yes, we're going to see kids doing things like having tantrums and meltdowns and screaming and freaking out when something doesn't go their way, and that is completely age appropriate and normal. So a lot of my book is also just like normalizing, saying, look, the behavior that you think is terrible is actually probably, just your kid being a kid.
And it's very, I feel that parents feel very powerless when this is happening. You're in the grocery store, or worse, you're on a plane, kids freaking out. What should a parent do? What is the correct thing for a parent to do when their kid is throwing a tantrum on the groceries, on the ground in the grocery store, or in a seat in the plane, kicking the seat in front of them? Um, what do they do? Because I often watch parents go through this, and my heart's pounding, and I'm thinking of all of probably the incorrect things to do. What's the answer?
Okay, well, I wish I had like one simple answer that was going to solve this for every parent and every kid, but it's not quite that simple, because different kids respond differently to different things, and you kind of have to test out what works. But I will give you sort of a best practices approach that I find has been helpful with my kids in these situations. I mean, the first thing to keep in mind is that when your kid is losing their mind, upset, they really can't listen to you and they can't process things rationally. So you telling them like, calm down, it's okay, like, or having to have, trying to have some kind of heart to heart with them in that moment, it's just not going to work. They are, their brain is like, it's just incapable of taking in like words and making sense of things. They're just so angry. I mean, it's like when you lose your temper, you're just in like on a different plane, right? And you can't just engage on a normal level with things. So what experts say can be helpful is, first of all, it's just like let them have their feelings, to some degree, and validate their feelings and say, oh my gosh, you're so mad that we're sitting on this airplane for 3 hours, or you're so hungry, or you're so frustrated. But then to, also then try to set some kind of limit. Like, I know you're so mad, but you can't kick the seat in front of you. And if you keep doing that, I'm going to have to pick you up and walk you down the aisle, or take you to the bathroom. Telling them, I totally get that you're feeling this way, but it's not okay to do X or Y. It's not okay to hit. And if you keep hitting, here's what's going to happen. So it's both, acknowledging their feelings and letting them know it's okay to have the feelings. The feelings aren't the problem. Everybody has feelings, and that's normal, but there are, limits to what it's okay to do with those feelings. So that's, and it depends on the situation you're in. It depends on your kid and what they're doing, but that's generally the approach. And then later on, once the kid is calmed down, it can be really useful to then have a conversation about like, so, earlier, gosh, you were so upset and I totally understand, but let's talk about, what happened and what you could do instead in that situation. And again, it depends on your kid's age. If they're 18 months old, you're not going to have a very long conversation about this, but if they're 5 or 6 or 7, then you can talk about it later and try to figure out, what could we do next time that would be better.
I think so much of your book was around helping children really understand all of these things that's happening inside themselves. And I really loved some of the things that you had around when you're engaging with content, and it could be a book, it could be a TV show, it could be a movie. You had some really neat ways of bringing learning and teaching moments to life for families and children in that. And I'd love to hear more in your words about that.
So one of the big themes of my book is that often our instinct as parents is to avoid talking about big issues. We don't like to talk about race, and we don't like to talk about gender and sexism. We don't like to talk about sex, and we don't like to talk about pornography and all these things, that and maybe even bullying. We feel like, oh, these topics are kind of too old for our kids, or we don't want to steal their innocence away, and they don't need to know this stuff. But actually, what the research suggests for each of these areas is that the more we engage with our kids, the more we bring in like current events and issues that are really big in the world with our kids, the better off they are. Because the fact is, like, they're exposed to the media, they're hearing things from their friends at school or preschool, like they are learning about the world, they are exposed to these things. And if we don't engage with our kids about them at all, then they're just getting their information from these other sources that may not be all that accurate, right? And may not reflect our values. So what I talk about a lot in the book, as you mentioned, is using things in our everyday lives as opportunities to have brief conversations about issues that we care about. So, when I'm driving down the road and I pass a house that has a Black Lives Matter sign, let's say, and we support Black Lives Matter, I will say, hey, look, do you know what that sign means? And have you seen that before? And let's talk a little bit about what it means. Or if we're watching a show and something that I feel like is kind of sexist takes place, then I remember actually there was one thing in the Summer Olympics last summer. Again, time is like elusive to me these days, but there was I think it was like the women's kayaking was on, and the announcers kept referring to them as girls. And it made me so mad. And I thought, this is a moment where I want to talk about this with my kids, because they weren't calling the men's kayakers boys, they were calling them men, right? And so I paused it and said, isn't it interesting how they're referring to these women who are very clearly women as girls? And, what is the connotation of that? I guess I didn't use the word connotation, but, what does girls mean as opposed to women? And why do you think that happens? And just using these moments that we just experience in life to press pause and to talk to my kids about them. This is something I do a lot. And in books, TV shows, movies, whatever we're kind of experiencing or just driving down the road, like taking that moment and using it as a conversation starter can be really helpful.
I love that. I mean, in my personal life, I'm also the person that wants to press pause on the TV shows to discuss what's happening and why people are doing it. And my partner is not a fan. So I'm definitely going to play this segment to her and be like, see, I'm just helping us process our feelings, get on the same page.
Yes.
There were some really, you had so many elements of the stories which aren't just relevant for kids and parenting, but actually fascinating for people, for all people. So many of these elements are like massively relevant and are really interesting in terms of predicting success. You had this awesome study about grit, which I was just felt so interesting, and how we can instill that, and the importance of instilling both grit and not tying our kids to success, but to effort. And I'd love to hear more in your words about how these things are important for raising kids.
Yeah, I found that research so interesting. The research on grit and the research on growth mindset, which are different but very related. So one thing that I learned, and that I think is hard for parents sometimes, um, it's hard to see our kids struggle. It's hard to give them, a task that's difficult for them and watch them get frustrated and watch them maybe even fail. And so sometimes our instinct is to jump in and do the thing for them, help them with the puzzle and do their homework for them, because we don't want them to experience that frustration. And we're scared of that. We're scared of like what they're going to take from that feeling of discomfort and frustration and failure. But what the research suggests there is it's actually really important for kids to do hard things. And one of the ways that we know that grit develops in young people is through having to try and persevere through difficult things and seeing yourself maybe slowly get better and better and better. And when we as parents jump in and fix problems for our kids actually interpret that as us not having faith in them, us thinking, oh gosh, mom thinks I can't do this. Mom thinks I'm not capable of doing my homework. And that actually undermines their self-esteem over time. And they've done surveys of kids who say, yeah, like every time my dad helps me with my math homework, I take that as evidence that my dad thinks I can't do math. And so really it's doing the opposite of what we're hoping to do. It's making them feel worse about themselves rather than making them feel better about themselves. So the take home there is like, let your kids struggle, let them experience challenges. And when they are, you can be on the sidelines saying, I know this is hard, but you're doing great, and encouraging them and maybe, doing some scaffolding to help them a tiny bit, but not jumping in and doing it for them. And then the other part of this is related to work done by a Stanford psychologist named Carol Dweck. And this has to do with mindset. And so this is something I also is really hard, I think, for parents. Oftentimes with our kids, we want to tell them like, you're so smart, you're so good at soccer, you're a natural ballerina, you were born good at swimming, whatever we say, these kinds of messages that we give that like our kids have a particular skill and they were born with it, or they were born with these smarts. That is something that is fostering what's called a fixed mindset. And the problem with a fixed mindset is when you keep telling kids this, over time, they start to think that ability is something you're either born with or you're not born with, and that there's really nothing you can do about it. And so let's say you've praised your kid for being good at math, and then 3 weeks later, they fail their math test or they get not a good grade. And then they think, well, gosh, maybe what mom and dad said about me being good at math is wrong. Maybe I'm not good at math. And if math is something you're either, born being good at or not, and I'm not good at it, then what's the point? I'm not good at it. I'm never going to be good at it. And so anytime somebody who has been praised with a lot of fixed mindset language, like you're good at this, you're natural, when those kids experience failure or challenge, they start to doubt that they have any ability. And then they're like, well, and I can't develop it because it's something you're either born with or you're not. So they give up a lot easier. When they encounter challenges, they give up. They're like, I don't want to try this anymore. It's too hard and I'm not going to get better. The opposite of a fixed mindset is a growth mindset. And this is what parents should be aiming to do, which is not praising for skills or smarts, but praising for effort and tying effort to outcome. So, if your kid comes home with a good grade on a math test, instead of saying, oh my gosh, you're so good at math, you're a natural mathematician, you would say, you did so well on this test. It must be because you worked so hard. It must be because you studied so hard. And that's fantastic. And when you're using growth mindset language, what it teaches kids is that, effort builds ability, and that ability is not some fixed thing you either have or you don't have. It's something that will grow over time the more you put into it, and that challenges and failures are actually like brief stumbling blocks on that road to success, that they actually help you get better at the thing, and so you have to experience challenge in order to get better and better and better. So growth mindset's super powerful. When I started using it with my kids, like I noticed big differences. And so the more that you can just, avoid that praising for smarts or ability, and instead praising for effort and outcome, you will be fostering that growth mindset and your kids will become more resilient.
Love that. That's so great. That's so great. And I think a lot of this has come from do you feel like as millennials, we heard a lot around like self-fulfilling prophecy, right? There was that, like, you have to be positive, you have to create this self-fulfilling prophecy. It's something that if you tell people, hey, you're amazing, you're really smart, then there was, I think, some study way back when that said that that had a positive impact. And I feel like perhaps the impact of this has actually been creating a bunch of fixed mindset where people are told they're special, and then when they don't do something, they quit.
Yeah, I do think that is the root of the problem. There was so much emphasis in the 80s and 90s on like, what can we do to build self-esteem? And you know, even like politicians were really interested in this idea of like making sure that we raise kids with really healthy self-esteem, and that is important. But unfortunately, the way that they assumed we should do that by telling kids like you're great, you know, you're amazing, you're special, giving them all these participation trophies for everything, that is actually not the way to foster healthy self-esteem. That actually kind of does the opposite, that we realized over time with research. So yeah, I mean, it has its roots in this like obsession with self-esteem from like 70s, 80s, 90s. It's really interesting.
One of the things that really surprised me, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, wow, you're right, is around electronic usage and a comparison between electronic usage between children. This is Generation Alpha, I think, and the millennials. And it's not what you expect. I'd love to hear more about this. And I'm talking more about parents being on their phones.
Oh,
Heck of a lot more than you expect.
Yeah, you know, we worry so much about our kids using technology too much, being on phones and iPads and TVs too much, games. And what we fail to realize is that we as parents are often on our phones a lot more than our kids are. And we're kind of blind to it. We don't realize it. And, you know, that is sending a message to our kids, especially it's a confusing message if we're telling our kids, you know, oh, we don't want you spending so much time playing games and, you know, phones are bad. And then every second they're seeing us using our phones and distracted and, you know, not even engaging with them because we're checking Instagram or whatever. That is really a confusing message for them. And that's not sending the message we want to be sending. Yeah. And I struggle with this. I mean, I feel like I'm constantly checking my Twitter and my Instagram as somebody who kind of feels like I have to be on social media. And, you know, my kids will say, Mom, can you please put down your phone? And I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? What message am I sending here? So it's something that we really need to work on as parents.
Awesome. I think that, I have like a few questions, but how long do we have here? Oh, we've been flying in. We're pretty much at time, Melinda, and I don't want to take too much of your time. Oh, you've been so generous with it. Well done, so professional, so good, so many great examples. I love that. That was awesome.
Good, you asked great questions. Yeah.
It was a really fun conversation, and yeah, great job with the book again. I just loved how you got into like the real shit, like all of the stuff that people are scared about, because we think of ourselves as our kids as this like Garden of Eden, you know. And we don't want to be the one to let the serpent in. We just want to be like, hey, everything's perfect. Children are pure. They could never be racist. They could never be bullies, because like, why would anyone do something to someone else to like get more power or you know?
Yeah.
And as long as we don't put the snake in the Garden of Eden, then everything will be fine. And it's actually kind of more like, no, the default is, it's interesting because in one point in the book, you say like, look, kids are basically good. But the other point, it's like, hey, they are going to do weird stuff. You know what I mean? And it's like the little bit of tension there is like, no, you have to actually play an active role in being like, hey, your kids are default probably a little bit racist just because that's how they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they say they're looking at the world and the world is racist. So they're taking that in. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like you said, like kids are little detectives, right? They're picking up on the clues, but they're detectives. They are picking up on what's not being said. And they're trying to understand the rules, all of these crazy rules. Like, why can't I touch myself here? Why can't I do this in public? Like, why can't I why are you being weird about that person? And it's really,
Right. And then when they see our weirdness or our, our inability to talk about something, they're like, well, that's interesting. That must mean it's like a really important
Yeah.
topic, like, why do my parents never talk about like sex, when
Yeah.
I see stuff happening on TV shows and, and then or race, and then that makes it even more salient to them. Like, this is a really big issue then if my mom won't talk about it or my dad won't talk about it. Yeah, it's messy.
It's messy, but you've done a great job of like putting in all the research, making it human, and also being like, yeah, I'm doing the work, I'm making mistakes. Like, and as a founder of a relationship app, like, oh my goodness, I'll spend like an entire day writing content, reviewing stuff, building these surveys, and come to some like big truths, and you're like, wow, this is so good, this is such a healthy way to communicate, awesome. And then like the next day do the exact opposite of everything that I've just been helping 150,000 people change. You know what I mean?
Yes. Me too. I'm sitting here talking about how to be a good parent. And then I make the exact, I do the exact opposite the next day. And I'm like, what am I doing? I'll tell my kid they're smart, like probably later today, and then be like,
Yeah.
It's so hard because our instincts, there are instincts, and it's a lot of like how we were raised too, right? And what our parents did. And so that's ingrained, and we got to kind of like slowly work past it, but it's hard.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. Lovely to meet you. Have an awesome
Yes, lovely to meet you too.
So appreciate it.
Thank you. You take care. Bye.